Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in this live stream. I hope you're doing fine wherever you are in the world. So just a quick logistics as usual. I really want to encourage you to participate in the discussion. So please share your thoughts, any comments in the chat box. If you have any questions, as usual, I will be happy to answer them. I'll do my best to answer all questions, but sometimes it's quite difficult if there are lots of messages. So the power of thinking for yourself. So I thought that maybe we'll start with maybe building this kind of ideal of a free thinking person or of person who thinks independently. So how would you define this kind of individual? How do you see that person? Okay, hopefully it's working now. Can you let me know in the chat box? I don't know what happened. For some reason, my web browser crashed. Buffering. Oh no, what the hell is going on? Okay. Okay, perfect. So it's working now. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened because for some reason my web browser crashed, but seems to be fine for now. Okay, so first question, as I was saying, maybe we'll start with defining kind of this ideal, quote unquote, ideal person who thinks independently, who thinks for themselves, who is a kind of free thinker. So if you think about this question, what would that person do in their life? How would they interact with other people? What sort of values would they have? What sort of things in their life they would be doing, prioritizing? What sort of relationships they would have? So to start on my end, I think it starts with basically defining your own values in life. So basically, it's not about so much organizing your life around things that other people find valuable. I know it's a kind of obvious idea because you think independently, you are a free thinker, so you start prioritizing things that are important to you. But I think on a deeper level, it goes a little bit deeper than this. Sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit because I got a little bit too stressed out with this crashing things of my web browser. So such free thinker would follow their own values. They would define things that are important to them and not necessarily to other people. So in my opinion, such individual would kind of stand out from the society a little bit. It doesn't mean that, at least from my perspective, it doesn't mean that essentially such individual becomes a total outcast or they stop interacting with people or stop forming relationships. But in my opinion, it has to do with doing things that are kind of aligned with these deeper values, deeper priorities. But there's more to that. And I think that extra bit that could help such an individual to be a free thinker, to be independent, is questioning things, questioning the narrative, questioning the values, questioning the expectations of the community, of the society. And it is, in my opinion, I think it's a kind of complex process because you start within this little system called family, right? So your parents in this process of when you're growing up, when you're developing, your parents are already passing their own values, their own priorities, which most likely come from the wider system in which they are embedded in. So the society, right? And then the whole world, or the country, or, you know, there's like a system within a system. So what happens is that as you are developing, as you are kind of assimilating all these ideas, all these narratives, all these priorities, all these values from your parents and then from your peers at school, right? You start formulate your own outlook on life, your own perspective. Okay, doing this is right, doing something else is wrong, right? You start developing expectations. So you meet certain individuals, you meet certain people in your life, and you start judging them as well, right? This person doesn't, maybe that person doesn't follow my expectations, which actually come from, you know, the system I was developing in the society of that time. So if that person doesn't follow my expectations based on these values, I'm probably not going to be friends with that person. And that goes even deeper. So you might start avoiding reading certain books, watching certain Okay, I think it's working. I don't know what's happening with this technical. I never had these problems before. So if it's gonna crash again, I'll have to interrupt this live stream because it's not gonna work. This actually sucks. I don't know what's happening. I changed some settings, so hopefully that's gonna work now. But again, if it's gonna crash again, I'll just have to stop, which is kind of interesting that, you know, with this subject. So let me just quickly read some comments. A free thinker takes in the value of the culture, but only by evaluating them first. No whole cloth. Yeah, so that's the direction I was gonna go into. So as I was saying, I was kind of comparing and contrasting a free thinker, an independent thinker, with someone who doesn't fully choose the outlook on life, doesn't fully choose this values. So as I was saying, by default, we assimilate all these cultural things, we assimilate all these values, we assimilate all these beliefs, expectations, right? And it is a complex subject because it's not only that we learn by observation, that we learn through interacting with other people, but we also go through this process of kind of conditioning. So we see someone getting punished for maybe some independence or self-expression that might be completely different to the social norm. And obviously we then don't want to do it because we don't want to get punished. And punishment could be anything, you know, being ridiculed, being kind of ostracized from the society, anything. Or we can get punished ourselves if we have this drive from an early age to express ourselves, to think for ourselves, to, you know, maybe look at the world in a creating kind of creative way. So in my opinion, I think this is the default position. So we all assimilate automatically, no matter what we do, what we don't do. And, you know, if we are lucky, we can some people are lucky in a sense, maybe they are, you know, they have the right temperament or the right people around them. They can realize this process from an early age. But some people, I think, they might need to go through a kind of unlearning process in adulthood where they have to pick and choose basically the whole values and their beliefs and kind of sort them in terms of which belong to them, which belong to other people, which are actually right, which are correct, and which are not correct. So again, once you go through that process, if you go through that process, and I think in terms of the age, it depends on the person, depends on the experiences they have, depends on the opportunities they encountered. You're on this path, in my opinion, of becoming this free thinker, free kind of independent thinker, where you start thinking for yourself. But this process actually, it's about you. It's not about other people. It's not about, raging towards others for implementing some beliefs or developing some conspiracy theories that there's some human programming going on, which I don't deny there is. Who knows? But to keep this, as rational perspective as possible, it's not other people's fault that we develop this automated kind of assimilated values, assimilated narratives, and kind of automated ways of thinking, where we are conditioned to expect certain things. We expect people to be predictable in some ways, and if someone goes out of this norm, we can be very quick to judge such individual without actually questioning where our reaction is coming from. So there's also this role of feelings playing in this process of thinking and judging and developing our perspective, which I'm actually going to cover last, as long as this live stream survives to the end. Please tell this to the Black Lives Matter movement. Yeah, I'm not going to go that direction. I really want to avoid going political for many reasons. Difficult to be a free thinker. Groupthink means people are afraid to go against the thoughts of the group majority, even if the group are wrong. Yeah. So there is, as I was saying, there is this role of feelings playing in, which I'm going to go into. So it seems being an independent thinker or free thinker is about following and developing one's true values and feelings. Yes. So essentially, from my perspective, it all comes down to choice. Have you chosen the particular value? Have you chosen a particular belief? Is it really the belief? Is it really what you believe? For example, regardless what that is, if it's an ideology, if it's a perspective, if it's an interpretation or expectation, do you really agree with it, and why? So questioning this kind of allows you to look at it from a different perspective. Sometimes those going outside of norms and marching to their own drama have less anxiety, more independence. I think less anxiety and more independence. From this perspective, I think it's a really good incentive, because if you imagine that for however long, whether you've been doing that for 5 years, for 10 years, imagine if you start going against the society, against the outlook. Again, it doesn't mean going against people, judging them or ostracizing them or, becoming a total outcast. But once you start doing it, that's going to provoke lots of anxiety, at least at first. They're going to be shame, they're going to be, kind of social awkwardness, because you're not sure what to express, what is allowed to be expressed. But at the same time, if you're on this path of developing this independent thinking, there will be this drive to push you forward, so that no matter how you feel, no matter how much anxiety you experience when you're expressing yourself, how much embarrassment or how much shame you might experience while you're doing it, while you, from some perspective, while you're saying some weird things, while you are doing some weird things, when you are going completely against people's expectations, the more you do it, the more resilient you're going to become to these feelings. So what happens is that, eventually, I'm not saying if these feelings are going to disappear, maybe they will. But I think there is a chance that they at least they will subside to a level where you don't have to pay attention to them anymore. So I think that another aspect I was going to add to this idea of free thinking. So imagine I kind of explain how by default we are going through this automatic way where we assimilate all these beliefs. So in a sense, I think a huge part of this process, especially in childhood, while we are learning, while we are developing, is this idea of authority. So authority for a child is obviously someone who knows more, who is there to advise them, who is there to guide them forward, someone who, you know, kind of mastered life, especially from a perspective of a child. An average, let's say an average child, a child that, you know, is in a healthy family, everything is fine, there's no major trauma, no major struggles. From a perspective of that child, authority is, you know, is there to guide this child development. So the authority knows more. The authority knows how to live, knows how to solve problems, and can advise the child if necessary. So authority in that case could be anyone really who is an adult, who is someone who has more power, who has more more power generally. So more independence, more opportunities to do things, more control, more ability to control things. So it could be parents, could be school teachers, could be all the children on a playground, right? So what role do you think this authority will play in developing our outlook on life? And most importantly, in developing our attachment, in a sense, to following other people, to following the social norms, to following the kind of mainstream narrative, to follow media, right? And we as adults, we are actually not that different to children, because we're still following authority to some extent when deciding on what is right, what is wrong, right? We might listen to some influencer also on social media. We might listen to, you know, someone who maybe is more successful. We might listen to anyone that we perceive to be kind of, to have more power than we are. So obviously you see here that there is this idea of power play to some extent, and the concept of authority when developing our perspectives, our beliefs, when making actual choices in life. I think this one is more important, because if you separate just the belief system, just the narrative, okay, it's happening in your head. Maybe you're getting entertained with it to some extent. But I think the biggest role it plays is actually on our actions. So the decisions we are making. If you believe that something is right, if you believe that something is needed or necessary or acceptable, or something that will help you in some way, you're gonna make a decision to follow that direction. So you see how the concept of authority doesn't fully disappear when we are adults, unless we're gonna start questioning things, unless we become these free thinkers, in my opinion. So from your perspective, if you start questioning, I'm really curious about your responses on that. Who is your authority currently in your life, and why? Why do you see that person as an authority? To what extent are they authority? Are there many people as your authority right now? Is there someone that you consider to be a major influence on your life? And what's the reason of that? What is the purpose of that authority? Very, very curious about responses, your responses. If you start questioning who is your authority right now and why. Authority can make you punitive of yourself for your own way of thinking, which exists outside of this set of ideals. Right, so there is this idea of seeing authority as actually being punitive to some extent. I mean, that's what it was in childhood for us, right? The authority was punitive. If we didn't do what our parents told us, if we violated some social laws, if we talked a little bit too much at school, for example, during a lecture, there was a punishment, right? So is there still some punishment from the authority when we are adults? I'm wondering. What about if your authority is yourself, maybe your shadow? Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Parents are the main authority, I guess, as you don't want to upset or disappoint them. Does it also happen in adulthood, I wonder? Is there someone in your life you don't want to upset or disappoint? I think that would be, actually, AJ actually made a very good point. Because I think if you start thinking about it, is there anyone who you think you might upset, or are you afraid to upset someone? Is that person an authority to some extent? I realize it's my peers, friends, social media in a way I think represents authority for me, as there are unspoken rules to social media. There you go. My authority has been my stepmother. Andrea, bosses, yeah. Yep, so basically, anyone who you perceive has a power over you to some extent, be it physical, be it emotional, be it, at your work, anything really. I think, in my opinion, if you perceive that they have more power over you, not in general, but over you than you have over yourself, in my opinion, that is probably the authority. So we kind of figured out already to some extent that a way out of this system, if you like, or the way out of this, I would even call it to some extent a cognitive prison, because as we are constantly introjecting these ideas, assimilating what is right, what is wrong, where's a place for our own choice, right? Where's a place for our own decisions? And I don't mean, at the same time, I just realized, and I probably should have mentioned it before, that I don't mean, again, that all the society is wrong, or all society, or maybe all authority is wrong, or that it's wrong to have authority. The whole purpose of this exercise is that I want you to start questioning where your idea is coming from, and where does your power really go? Because I think that the power in this situation is quite important. Power in terms of, investing your emotions, or being scared of some consequences, or maybe not being able to do something because you might think that there will be huge consequences on your life. But that power often doesn't manifest directly, but it manifests through your beliefs and through how you perceive yourself, and through how you perceive other people, and how you perceive authority, right? Because, for example, I can perceive my boss as an authority to some extent, right? But at the same time, when I recognize my own power, that boss will not have as much power over me. The moment I start realizing and taking ownership of my own life, of my own decisions. So in terms of going out of this system and developing this independence, developing this ability to think freely, to think for yourself, where you are not bombarded with, social media, or all these social narratives, all this ideology, right? It's all just, if you kind of take a step back from all this, it's just a one big noise, right? And you're picking only things that you think are relevant, right? But at the same time, if hundreds of people are talking about a certain issue, right, it starts standing out. So you think it's relevant, if you think it's important, you think to some extent that maybe that ideology, maybe this people, maybe where this idea is originating from, it has more power over your thinking to some extent than you have over yourself, maybe even. And we do it all the time. We read an article on Facebook, boom, that's true. Yep, I agree with it, right? We hear someone talking about, we hear half of the world talking about some ideology. We read about it. Yeah, it's true, I agree, right? Because other people are talking about it. And there are many different examples like this. So as I think it was ETI if I remember right, said before in the discussion that it all kind of starts with this questioning and critical thinking. So critical thinking is, just to kind of give a brief overview, critical thinking is about appreciating different points of view. So critical thinking is always associated with evaluation, and evaluation is a part of critical thinking, but there's more to that. So for example, when I ask you to evaluate critically, when I ask you to think critically about the movie you just watched, right? There is a component of evaluation. So what went right with that movie? What went wrong, right? What are the advantages and disadvantages of, for example, watching that movie or directing this movie? So you see here, you're already taking up different positions, right? But critical thinking on this kind of basic level is stepping outside, and I was just gonna say it, as Calvin said, kind of playing devil's advocate. So what would happen if you actually agreed with an alternative perspective just for 10 minutes? See what happens, see how it feels, see what's happening then to your belief system. So for example, to again use the same example of a movie, let's say you come to a conclusion that there was a great movie, right? It's informative, it's well made, right? You analyze the whole plot, it's well made. Now step outside of it and start thinking about exactly opposite point of view. So the movie has been useless, it's been poorly made, and then try to find evidence for this opposite perspective. So you can play with the multiple perspectives, until it kind of depends on your level of creativity, how many perspectives you can get on a particular issue, right? And I think critical thinking hasn't been encouraged enough. Basically, people encounter an ideology, people encounter a particular view, encounter people who reinforce the belief, reinforce the expectation, and that's it. They sink in, they assimilate it, they swallow it without actually chewing what they are assimilating first. So basically, they're just introjecting without evaluating, without thinking critically what is actually going on. And then I think even more important part of the critical thinking, but actually I'm not sure if I can put a value judgment in terms of which part is more important, but I think one of the most important elements of critical thinking is kind of stepping out of the context. So you need to evaluate not only the information that you are receiving, but also the context in which that information has been produced, has been developed, and has been communicated to you. So it's not just the information itself, it's not just the ideology, it's not just the belief, it's not just the expectation, it's not just some random information, right? But there's a context in which that information has been produced and a context in which it has been expressed. So a huge part of critical thinking is looking at this bigger picture, right? Is there, for example, an incentive for someone to pass this information? Is there an incentive for someone to twist things a little bit? And in terms of once that information is, expressed, is there an incentive for you to receive this information, to accept it, to agree with it, right? Are you gaining something from it, or are you losing something from it, right? So critical thinking is looking at a particular object. Again, could be information, could be a belief, could be an ideology, could be a person himself or herself, right? Evaluating it from as many different perspectives as you can. So evaluation, analysis, take different elements of that object, then put them together, then tear them apart again. And then also step out and look at the whole context in which that object is situated in right now. And maybe consider the consequences, so causes and effects of what caused this object to, become alive in a sense, and what's going to happen after. So what are the causes for a particular information to arise in the first place? So you need to kind of be able to detach yourself from the belief, from the information, to be able to do that. If you are attached, if you are like, yeah, I swear 100% this is true, right? You won't be able to step out completely and detach yourself from this perspective, or from that belief, or from that information, because you will be so immersed in it. So you need to be able to kind of detach yourself and actually admit that you might be wrong, that this information might be completely wrong. So I think these are the kind of foundation of critical thinking, if I had to describe. Let me just quickly read some comments. Perhaps we offend other people purely from asking questions. Probably. There is a strong chance, because when you ask questions, it forces that person to question their own idea, right? It forces them. Questioning is actually like a little bit like taking this little step towards detachment. So yeah, that you can observe this idea or this ideology or belief, right? So when you start questioning, it's the first step. So when someone is super attached to that belief or that idea, right? And you start questioning it, yeah, it's gonna be offensive, quote unquote. Is critical thinking more of an introverted thinking function? I don't think you need I don't think you need I don't think you need a cognitive function, specific cognitive function for this, but I would imagine thinking function in general, if it's introverted or extroverted, will allow you to think critically. And I think introverted thinking is probably the most useful, because you are able to contain this ideas, and you build these models. Okay, so critical thinking. Is there anything else you want to add to this? How do you define critical thinking? Is there something I'm missing? So if there's anything else you want to add on the subject of critical thinking, I'm very open. So I think that, as I was saying, as we detach ourselves from these ideas, from beliefs, right? We start, basically the very fact of doing so is an act of independence, because we are already stepping outside of this framework we are embedded in. And we make a decision to question the idea or a belief, right? So when you read a book, your feelings might be, yeah, it's a great book, right? You've seen someone doing something, you met some individual, yeah, it's a great person, right? You see something on a TV or you watch a movie, very easy, like, yep, I agree with it, and you swallow absolutely everything without questioning whether it's beneficial, whether it's right, whether it's true. So as I was saying, detaching yourself, taking a step back, is the first step of critical thinking, and the first step towards your independence, towards this free thinking process, because you choose to detach yourself, you choose to step outside of this framework. And if you start thinking about the potential results of this process, I think there's tremendous rewards of applying this critical thinking in your everyday life. You can apply this method to anything, to your own feelings, to your own reactions, to your own decisions, to your own choices, to people you meet, to movies you see, to anything that you hear, that you see, right? Anything that requires your attention. It's very easy to immerse yourself in this process. It's very easy to just accept, right? And acceptance, blind acceptance, is not really a good friend of this process of free thinking. And I think that this critical thinking, okay, we have all these methods. And in terms of the rewards, obviously, as I was saying, there's this, you know, making this first step towards greater independence. But also, it kind of, in my opinion, I think it builds your patience. Because when you are using critical thinking, regardless whether, you know, you take this critical view on your feelings, on your relationships, on the beliefs or people that you see, right? It takes patience, because we are used to jumping to conclusions. We are used to wanting to have a solution and have it right now. We want to have a conclusion right now, right? So when someone asks us for opinion, or when we have to make a decision, or when we go through this process of judgment, it's usually very automatic, very fast, right? We jump to these conclusions very quickly. Let's say we meet a person who has a completely opposite political views to us, right? The first judgment is that person is stupid, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, it's pointless, it doesn't make any sense, right? We're so quick to jump to all these conclusions. So applying this critical thinking will enable you to develop this patience, because when you're thinking critically about something, when you're analyzing something, it's like you remain in this, how to put it, kind of a neutral spot, right? Without jumping to conclusion until you are able to, reach a conclusion that is satisfactory for you. It takes time, because you have to take time to analyze whatever you are looking at. It takes time to familiarize yourself with this information, with this feeling, with that person, right? In order to gather enough information. And you need enough information to form as accurate conclusions as possible. So it takes patience. And I would say, don't be afraid of that time when you are in this space, when you're not sure what is happening, or you're not sure what decision to make, or you're not sure how to judge something or someone, right? Don't be afraid of this space, because in this space, when you are neutral, when you are not sure about your opinion about something, when you're not sure what is the right path to take, that space actually offers you to gather more information that will improve your future decision. Critical thinking requires admitting that one is wrong, even when it hurts one's self-interest. Yeah, because you take this, it's like more objective point of view. So we don't always like that. Nobody likes that. If you are self-aware, then it's easy to admit you're wrong and to be vulnerable. Yes, because, yeah, that is actually a really good point, because it enables you, that self-awareness actually enables you to detach yourself, to be aware of as many points of view as possible. Thank you, Adrian, for joining. Hope to see you next time. So, and the last point I wanted to add to this process, kind of this critical thinking, is as I was saying, there is this process of looking at an information or a belief from this alternative perspectives. But what actually allows us to gather more information in these different perspectives is actually our openness to alternative points of view. So we might have a judgment, we might have a prejudice that something is wrong, something is stupid, we don't like that. But what would happen if just, put these reactions aside, because these are just reactions, most likely triggered by this kind of past conditioning from childhood, from the society. What would happen if you just put them aside? Okay, I'm having this reaction, which is fine. And just open yourself up to alternative perspectives by, for example, interacting with people who hold opposite views, people who might seem kind of weird to you or very different, or watching movies that might seem a little bit off-putting at first, right? Anything that kind of drags you outside your comfort zone, something that is completely different, something that is completely unfamiliar or new to you, right? That's how we gather this information, and that's how we can then expand on this ability of thinking critically about things, because then we have more information, then we have alternative view, and then we can actually use these alternative views to expand on our kind of analysis of the information of some data or a person. Only when we have as much information as we can about something, only then we can be sure that our way of thinking is kind of complete. So how does it tie to independent or free thinking? Again, to be able to go through this process of critical thinking, you need to be able to detach yourself. So when you're thinking critically, to some extent, it is already an act of independent and free thinking. I'm not saying it's, an absolute demonstration of being independent thinking, because you might still be operating within that paradigm of kind of social norms and what is acceptable. Your feelings might be acting out a little bit, but it's a first step. I would say it's a pathway towards this more independent thinking. And most importantly, I think, and I'm probably going to repeat myself like a broken record, but this critical thinking leads to this so-called meta perspective, where we are looking at how we are analyzing things. So this meta perspective, then, if you kind of look at your whole thinking process, critical thinking, let's say you are interacting with some ideology, right? At first you have a reaction, maybe you don't like that ideology at first, but then you start thinking critically. Okay, there's the context in which that ideology is situated. Here are the things that seem to be right about it. Here are the things that seem to be wrong. Here are the things I agree with. Here are the things that I disagree with. Meta perspective would basically be based on taking step even further and look at how you are coming to conclusions, how you are defining whether something is right or wrong, how are you defining whether that ideology is useful or not. And you can apply it to anything really in your life. When you are first analyze something, first apply this critical thinking and questioning, and then take an even further step back and then ask for how did you actually arrive at this conclusion? How did you come to this conclusion? How did you, where is that reaction or conclusion is coming from? So obviously throughout all this live stream, I've been referring to the role of feelings and emotions, that the role of feelings and emotions in this whole process of free or not free, independent or dependent way of thinking. So as we already kind of talked about it a little bit, we often jump to conclusions, we often develop this prejudice, or we often avoid certain things because we are guided by what is underneath. I like to call it a kind of term that just came to my mind, is this kind of primal anxiety, very ancient primal anxiety, where if we think independently, if we do something that is very different to what everyone else is doing, right, we're going to be ostracized, we're going to be excluded from the tribe, and we're going to die. That's what would happen 5,000 years ago. If you did that, if you started questioning your religion or the beliefs or what expectations, social expectations there are, you'd probably die. And especially if you went along with this questioning and just did your own thing. So this anxiety is kind of survival mechanism. Do you think it went away? Because from this more biological perspective, we are more or less the same humans as we used to be 5,000 years ago, let's say. We have same brains, right? It's like this, from a Jungian perspective, it's like this collective unconscious where we are driven by this very primal and ancient archetypes that like to play with our feelings and emotions a little bit. So when we do have certain, let's say, decisions to make, right? When we need to make a choice, I think it's quite possible that we might not even notice that fear or that anxiety that we're going to be excluded, or rather that we might be excluded, because it rarely actually happens these days that, you know, you're going to be excluded and you're going to die. Like, you know, if you're going to be excluded from one social group, there's another social group, you know, just waiting for you, people who are more similar to you. So I think that when we are making decisions, this fear, this anxiety is rarely even reaching our awareness. But I think it's still there if we are willing to pay attention, if we are willing to take a notice of what is really going on and what drives our decisions, right? What about society's views on wearing a mask? Yeah, it's still political. Sorry. No, I mean, like, I would be willing to talk about the subjects, but I like to keep it focused on psychology. So maybe in the future, I will actually create a separate channel where we can discuss these issues. I would actually really love to talk about it all. It's just, I want to keep it as much focused on psychology as possible. So as I was saying, from this evolutionary perspective, there is this automatic way of influencing our decisions, even if we don't notice that fear, even if we don't notice that anxiety that might be there, but the template is there in a sense. It's like an ingrained mechanism. For the same reason, most people will have a fear of jumping out of the plane, for example, right? It's another matter whether you're going to listen to this fear or not, right? It's this kind of survival mechanism that we all go through. So on this more practical level, I think what happens is that we want to stay in a comfort zone. We want to stay feeling that we participate in some ways, that we fit in, that we remain in a way, ideally, absolutely anonymous in a crowd, where we don't have to where we don't stick out too much, because sticking out could cost us life to some extent, right? Because maybe not everyone is going to agree with us. So to some extent, we like to be that anonymous person, especially on social media, especially where we even go out to some extent, even when we are at work. Ideally, we want to keep this level of being a mediocre individual where we don't stick out too much. This is our comfort. So on a more kind of cognitive level, on a more practical level, what happens is that, again, we continue being on this treadmill of assimilating anything what's going on and blindly agreeing with any narrative that is pushed onto us without questioning it. But what happens if you do start questioning things? What happens if you start seeing that you disagree with other people in your community? If you disagree with your coworkers? If you start to realize that you actually have different values, you have different preferences, you don't want your life to look like this, you want to go a different path, right? What happens if your family has been, having an expectation for you to be a scientist, right? And they are really happy for you to be a scientist, let's say some physicist, right? But then you are 30, for example, and you realize you want to actually be a musician or an artist, right? It's tremendous pressure to go against through. Even regardless if that person's parents are still alive or not, there is this still kind of anxiety and fear and kind of, in a way, coding or programming or simply conditioning out there in our minds, manifesting as fear or anxiety. So even if such individual will start questioning things and seeing that alternative pathway for themselves, if they're not going to do anything about it, they're going to be very frustrated. Usually that situation leads to this frustration and not wanting to be in this situation, not wanting people. And I think there could be lots of resentment and hatred arising from such a situation, when you're like kind of on a borderline between two different worlds. On the one side, you start questioning things and you use this critical thinking, and you know what your values are. You start disagreeing with things around you, even silently. But then on the other side, if you're not doing anything about it, then all that free thinking, all that independent thinking goes through the window. It's, in my opinion, it's kind of worthless to some extent, at least. And I don't mean that, you know, we have to completely change our lives and follow all our, you know, crazy ideas about independence. But it's about, you know, getting as close as possible to what we can do. So feelings from this perspective can keep us in this kind of bubble of what is comfortable to us, right? And I think there might be like a spectrum. So some people might be comfortable with, you know, just questioning a little bit the ideas, whether things are real, whether they agree with the society, but they might not be willing to go even further and immerse themselves in the alternative point of view, where they can get this alternative perspective and alternative information, right? And only then they can critically decide what to do with all that information, how to come to any conclusions if you have two contradictory point of views. But then on the other hand, the end of the spectrum, people, you know, they're gonna go explore different ideas, explore different ideologies, and they'll be comfortable with actually starting to live their independent lives based on their own values, their own decisions, right? Because it all starts in our mind. It all starts with independent thinking. We still first need to be able to question our own belief system, how we view things, why we are judging something in this particular way. Why are we saying that something is wrong or right? Why are we having this emotional reaction to something that is so different to us or so unfamiliar? And we keep staying in this, you know, comfortable bubbles that keep us anonymous, that keep us invisible, and keep us, you know, just underneath the line of where we start sticking out and becoming more independent. On the other hand, feelings and emotions can actually provide us with lots of encouragement to move forward. For example, you know, independence, or creating this separation between yourself and the world, where you start individuating, when you start feeling like you're having more control over yourselves, over your life. That could generate lots of positive emotions, right? So it is a kind of cost-benefit perspective. We could, you know, apply this cost-benefit analysis, where is it worth to start overcoming these fears and anxiety and shame to experience all these kind of pleasant emotions and kind of maybe in a sense empowerment or more independence or more control and feeling like we are individuating? Or is it easier to stay in this, you know, comfort zone where we don't have to experience fear, where we don't have to be ashamed of anything, where we feel in a sense safe, right? Where people, you know, who in a sense control their environment, people who are more powerful than us, can be this image of authority that we follow to a sense, to some extent, right? So it's a little bit still like in children, right? We still, even in adulthood, having all these fears and anxiety, we still want our mommy and daddy to be there, to guide us, to tell us what to do, to tell us what we need to think, to tell us what is right, what is wrong. And I don't think this is very conducive to, you know, free and independent thinking, because essentially independence is about being alone, and we need to be comfortable with that. Comfortable with knowing that, you know, we are separated from other people, that we are on our own to some extent. It doesn't mean that, you know, other people will not help us if we need that help, but essentially feeling that we are responsible for ourselves and staying in that comfortable bubble where we just follow the crowd, follow what we read, assimilate absolutely everything, all the information that comes our way, whilst rejecting anything that contradicts our point of view, automatically keep us in this safety zone where we don't have to fully feel responsible for our actions or for the actions of inside our lives. Anxiety makes us want to meld in, even disappear. Yeah, it's scary, and yeah, anxiety kind of makes you feel like you're disappearing. Or you want to disappear. You want to kind of go back to being a child where you don't have to worry about anything, right? Where you don't have to do anything, because the anxiety is like this. I think anxiety is this absolutely primal emotion where crossing that path, that threshold of anxiety, equals that we might die. Whereas anxiety is about being safe. So anxiety is like this enclosure that can hold us within this comfort zone, in a sense. So and as I was saying before, I think anxiety doesn't, in terms of this, you know, developing this independence and increasing our own personal responsibility, I think anxiety and fear, that doesn't always have to be very conscious, very visible to us, because it's so primal, it's so ancient, that it can't happen automatically. But I think there might be some ways to actually spot it. So for example, if we start paying attention to things that we want to avoid in our lives, if we start paying attention to reacting strongly to something, some ideology or a person that is very different to us, or a belief that is very unfamiliar, right? This reaction is often like a secondary reaction of anxiety. I mean, a great example is when, you know, you start criticizing someone and that person becomes kind of defensive or angry or resentful, right? They're actually not angry or they're not resentful, but they're actually anxious because they are being pushed outside of their comfort zone, whereas they don't want to stand alone, they don't want to question things, they don't want to apply this critical thinking, because that would mean they're alone, and it's super scary. So there might be, I think, many different kind of secondary emotion to anxiety and fear in terms of developing our independence. So I think I'm gonna end on this. Is there any, do you have guys any questions or any more thoughts you want to share? Just going to quickly look through my notes if I talked about everything I wanted. All right, any more questions before I go? Sorry, I have a bee in the room. Okay, so no questions. So I will be going then. Thank you so much for joining me today. And again, I apologize for all the technical problems on the beginning. And I'm really glad it actually worked. For some reason, my settings changed, so that's why it was a problem. Again, thank you very much for joining. Oh, there's a question. Okay. Some free thinkers face obstacles. What if you're too hypercritical? How do you take people's feelings into account in the decision-making process? Hypercritical. Well, hypercriticism, you know, doesn't mean automatically that you're ignorant of people's feelings. I think there is a way to be critical. And when you are critical, as I was explaining, when you're analyzing something, there are different elements to a particular information, a belief, or a person, right? So feelings is just another information you need to take into account when you analyze something. So let's say you perceive that someone did something wrong, let's say, right? So you see the evidence, you see maybe a manifestation, right? I don't know, silly example, they dropped a plate or something, right? So here's the physical evidence, right? Here's the actual object that you're analyzing or criticizing, right? But then there is a whole context as well. And feelings might belong to that context, right? So they might have done something because they've been feeling distracted due to problems at work or something like that, right? So feelings and emotions of another person is just another information. But I guess from another perspective, to arrive at this perspective where you're taking these feelings into consideration, is you need to be able to predict them to some extent. So predicting feelings, again, not jumping to conclusions, but maybe estimating how would that person react to something could be very useful, and taking that information into account when you deliver criticism. Where does your accent come from? So I'm a native Polish, and I've been living in England for about like 13 years before I moved to Portugal for now at least. So you can identify and empathize. Yes, so empathy, predicting how would someone react, and that could help you to actually paying attention to these feelings could help you, you know, enormously to see a bigger picture of why someone is doing something, why someone is believing in a certain things. INTJ problem, yeah. Hi Baron, sorry I will be leaving now. Hopefully I'll see you next time. It's 1 hour earlier. Okay guys, so again, thank you so much for joining today, and I hope to see you either next Sunday or in 2 weeks. Thank you again. Take care. Bye.